call to order the regular meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission for Wednesday, July 24th. If we can all stand for the pledge. May we please have roll call?
Chair Clark. Here. Vice Chair Perry. Commissioner Baker.
Here.
Commissioner Lesnar Buxton.
Here.
Commissioner Longstreet.
Here.
Commissioner Martinez Cohen. Here. Commissioner McGill.
Here. Ms. Zachary, do we have any changes to the agenda? Okay. Do these written communications count as written communications if they're related to agenda items?
For the agenda item.
Okay.
Related to IPM.
Okay, and then the general public comment.
Trees, sorry.
Okay, and then the general public comment also, is this a written communication? Okay.
Your public comment.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, any member of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the commission. The total amount of time for public comments will be 15 minutes. And it looks like we have a Mr. Rick Clausen who's requested to speak.
Madam Chair, can I turn on the overhead projector? My name is Rick Clausen, and I want to bring to your attention something that I discovered shortly prior to your last monthly meeting, but without time to bring it to the attention of the Park and Recreation Department for them to investigate. And so for the past month, they've been looking into what appears to be more than just a random vandalization of the Franceschi house, but actually a fairly surgical, if I can use that term, removal of one of the larger medallions on the house. I have been studying the medallion since about 2001. Unfortunately, this one I didn't measure, but I can give you an estimate. It was about 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, and it was over the lower carriage entrance to the house. And when I discovered it on the 20th of June, there was no debris at the base as you see it. It was a clean removal, and I thought initially it had been removed for public safety reasons, if it had been disintegrating and was going to fall on someone, or if it needed remediation for some reason. And that's why I checked with the department. Apparently that's not the case. And so it doesn't look like somebody just took a chisel to it or a hammer and demolished it. It was a clean job. They either were quite tidy or cleaned up after themselves with a vacuum, all without anybody knowing. I don't know when it actually occurred. I only noticed it June 20th. What I have on the handout to you is an explanation of what the medallion was. It was the Great Seal of the state of New Jersey, which was important to Alden Freeman, who put the medallions on the Franceschi house in 1927. I have a picture there of what the medallion looked like in situ before it was removed, and also what a copy of it looks like in Casa Casuarina in Miami Beach, which is where Alden Freeman built his own home in 1930. We have 85 medallions on Franceschi House. All but one of those medallions, a small one of a young boy, perhaps not even a Freeman medallion, were copied and put on Casa Casuarina with additional ones. There are 122 in Miami Beach on Casa Casuarina, and you may know that home better as the Versace Mansion. It's currently a boutique hotel and an upscale restaurant. I think that the house has historic merit. I am quite disappointed that this has happened to the house. I'd like to work with the department on what can be done to replace this, certainly prevent others from being damaged or stolen, and work toward an honorable setup for the house and park. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I don't have any more speaker slips for public comment. So with that, we'll move on to our youth council report. Do we have, no? That's right. They're having a well-deserved summer break. Commissioner committee assignment reports. I'll start with Ms. Martinez-Cohen.
Unfortunately, I was unable to attend the Creeks meeting last week, but they did receive a water quality code enforcement program update, which is online, as well as some information on the non-discrimination and harassment policy of the city.
Thank you. Commissioner Longstreet.
I missed the NAC meeting, but I did attend the dog park opening, and congratulations on a wonderful new facility.
Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, so I attended the Golf Advisory Committee. I was only there for a portion of it, but we began discussions about revenues. It did appear that comparing to last year's revenues, it was slightly shorter because of June gloom, but as we all recognize today, it's getting hot, which means more people are going to be golfing. With that increased heat means more care for the greens, and the superintendent is assuring us that they're going to do everything to be cost effective and make it sustainable, so the aesthetics of the golf course are going to remain, due course. There's many events coming up. They had a golf camp for kids that was completely maxed out, so there's a lot of attendance for all the different community events. There's the Ladies Learn and Play Academy. That's August 28th to September 25th. And then there's Glow Ball, which I encourage everyone to do. It's really fun. So get out there.
Commissioner Lexner Buxton.
Times in August and in June we had an awards reception where we also honored Susan Young, who's leaving the city and has been the soul of the youth council for many years and has helped me and the council tremendously.
Thank you. Commissioner McGill.
I attended the Park Foundation meeting last week. We reviewed financials, which were pretty straightforward, had an update on Cabrillo Pavilion, and some discussion on funding going forward and strategies for funding, because it's becoming increasingly difficult given all the pulls on people's purses. So we're running in a very slight deficit, which could easily be made up by some checks, but so do need to work on funding.
Thank you. I attended on the first, the Integrated Pest Management meeting. We're going to be talking more about that meeting and the Integrated Pest Management annual report later. But what we did talk about this month, the committee talked about aesthetic challenges that are going to take place in the parks with decreased use of yellow and red materials. The committee relooked at yellow materials with the goals of decreasing glyphosate use in the city. We talked about an increasing need of weed tolerance from the public. If we're going to start decreasing use of yellow pesticides, including glyphosates, we're going to have to expect our parks to maybe look a little bit different. And to compensate for that, we would like to request a little bit more investigation in using volunteers in our parks to do hand weeding. And the department's going to continue to do experiments with less hazardous and exempt materials. I also attended the ribbon cutting of the Mackenzie off-leash dog area, and that was delightful to see such an engaged public with their dogs. I attended the Street Tree Advisory Committee meeting, and we discussed and visited the trees that will be on the agenda later today. And that's it. Do we have any commission and staff communications? Nope. Ceremonial items? Nope. Does anyone have any questions on the summary of council actions? If nobody else did, I had one question. I didn't know what the State of California Standard Agreement was or referred to. Item 3B.
Chair Clark, are you referencing the resolution that we took to council for the grant application? Sure. So we are preparing a grant application under one of the funding areas associated with Proposition 68, which is the Park Bond Act that voters approved. In order to apply for the funds, we're required by the state to both have the City Council authorize our application and then authorize the Parks and Recreation Director to enter into their standard agreement. So it's essentially the agreement that the state requires us to sign if we're successful in the grant application. And that's something that the city reviews, the city attorney reviews before council makes that authorization. So we're familiar with what the terms would be if the funds are awarded to the city.
Great, thank you. I just didn't recognize the terminology, I guess. Regarding the minutes, would anybody like to make a motion?
I move we
Yeah, I would move that we waive the reading and approve the minutes of the regular meeting of June 26th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. This brings us to our Street Tree Advisory Committee items. Welcome, Mr. Downey.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the first item on your agenda is 1502 Chapala Street. There is an avocado tree that has essentially two branches. The one that is erect has died back, and the only remaining limb is horizontal. The applicant is requesting to remove the tree because of its condition, and there's a project going in to improve the properties there. The committee reviewed that, determined that the commission could make a finding that the principles of good forestry management would support removal, and the committee recommends the commission approve the removal on the condition a replacement tree is placed somewhere along the Chapala frontage that has the potential to achieve 25 feet in height.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, Commissioner McGill.
Yeah, I just really, one question. When I went up there, it didn't look to me that there was a huge amount of space on the Chapala frontage, and there's actually a pretty good street tree canopy. And I noticed that the applicant actually proposes putting some new trees on the Mitchell-Torrena side of the street, and I was wondering why insist on Chapala when there may be more space on Mitchell-Torrena?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, typically when there are private trees removals, the mitigation should be for private trees. They are proposing trees in there. They haven't really set on what species they are, and I believe that they can accommodate the mitigation through the trees they're already proposing to plant in that area. They are proposing a couple street trees on the Mitchell-Torrena side, which the staff has agreed to when they went in for development approvals, or in the DART process, excuse me. But the committee felt that there is sufficient room for an upright tree in that area, and the mitigation for the private tree removal should be with private trees.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? No? I would like to make a motion. Oh, okay.
I move that we concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee for the removal of the tree at the avocado tree at 1502 Chapala Street, and the condition that the tree be replaced along the Chapala Street frontage in the setback, correct, with a tree that has the potential to achieve 25 feet in height.
I think we'd
Oh.
like to cite the
Oh,
finding.
okay, that this meets the committee determined pursuant to Santa Barbara Municipal Code 15.24.090, and it meets the principles of good forestry management. Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next item on your agenda is 1429 Crestline Drive. The applicant is requesting to remove a declining Kaffir plum tree and one or two trunks of the Mediterranean fan palm. The Mediterranean fan palm, the reasoning is that it's close to the roof line there, and when the wind blows, it kind of damages the roof. The committee looked at the condition of the Kaffir plum and the proposed replacement of a tree elsewhere in the front yard. They concur that that would be consistent with principles of good forestry management and would not create a negative impact on the neighborhood. The removal of the trunks of this multi-trunk fan palm really constitutes a pruning rather than a removal because it is a multi-trunk tree. And they determined that the trimming could occur within the city's guidelines for trimming, and the removal of the tree was not necessary. So the recommendation is to approve the removal of the Kaffir plum on the condition that the applicant replace with a tree that has a potential to achieve 25 feet in height, and deny the removal of the Mediterranean fan palm. They suggest that the commission could find, again, that the principles of good forestry management support the removal of the Kaffir plum and that the neighborhood will not be materially affected by the removal.
Questions?
I do have a question. If the two trunks of the palm are removed, won't what's left be pretty unattractive? As I looked at it today, when I drove up there, it's a little bit of a telephone pole effect once you get rid of that, the greens, the fronds that are down low. If the tree, the replacement tree were planted more centered in that front yard, that canopy would kind of take over the whole area, and there's no street tree and no place for a street tree in front of that house. So would we then gain the street tree benefits too of shading the sidewalk and all of that?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, there are two other trunks that have some pretty good size and a whole bunch of pups that have began growing at the base of that Mediterranean fan palm. They're simply proposing to remove one or two of the trunks closest to the home. The committee didn't feel that would be any loss and that it could be maintained quite well in that location. It is true that a tree in the more centered in the yard will provide more even shading through that area. I neglected to mention the other reasons the applicant wants to remove the Kaffir plum. It is lifting a private walkway that goes adjacent to that site, and he suggests the public sidewalk is lifted. However, I didn't observe that.
No, I observed the private sidewalk, but I did not see anything in the public. Okay, thank you.
So just for absolute clarity, if we agree with the recommendation, the homeowner, the applicant would be able to remove 2 of the trunks and leave 1. It's 3 trunks, isn't it, or is it more than that?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, if the application is denied for the removal of the Mediterranean fan palm, they can still achieve their goals through pruning the trunks.
I would make a motion to concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee and partially approve the removal of the Kaffir plum on the condition that it is replaced by a tree that has the potential to reach a minimum of 25 feet in height, and deny the removal of the Mediterranean fan palm.
I'll second that.
Could you reference the
Oh, yes,
findings?
pursuant to the municipal code 15.24.090, we're making this finding based on the principles of good forestry management, and that the neighborhood will not be materially affected by the removal and replacement of the plum tree.
Okay.
And I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, do we have any discussion on that? Nope. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so moved.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next item on the agenda is 431 Old Coast Highway. This is part of a phased project by Public Works Department to install sidewalks where they never occurred. The Commission has reviewed this twice before. For Phase 1, there was a pine tree that was very close to the intersection where they had to install handicap access ramps, and that tree got approved on the condition that they provide space for street trees, as many as feasible, which they did. They have not yet installed the street trees. This project is still active. In Phase 2, there was a large pine tree in one of the yards that was going to be impacted by the grading and retaining walls necessary. That review, the Commission approved the removal on the condition they provide locations across the street for street trees, which they have incorporated in their design. Through that process, when they had the site surveyed, the location of the trees under review today were not located in the survey correctly. When they came to construction, it became apparent that the trees were in the middle of where they need to construct the retaining walls for retaining the soil for the properties. In fact, the retaining walls will go directly beneath the trunks of these 3 trees. The tree on the right in this photo here is a little farther back than the others. But the wing wall that allows access to that driveway does not currently provide enough visibility for oncoming traffic. So they also have to move that wing wall back to accommodate site visibility, which necessitates removal of that tree. The committee reviewed the site. They did question whether a replacement tree might be feasible. The property owner is in the middle of starting a development for the rest of the property and has expressed interest in a future application for additional trees. At that time, the Commission would have an opportunity to decide if replacement trees would be appropriate. The committee felt that installing a replacement tree at this point might be impacted by that development, so it might be better to wait. So the committee recommends that the Commission approve the removal of all 3 trees and suggests that you could make a finding that a reasonable and practical development of the property dictates removal. The sidewalks, again, is part of the Safe Routes to School project, and in order to retain the soil, they have to put a retaining wall in on private property, which goes directly underneath the trunk of those trees.
Just a comment, I would also like for the commission to consider that the finding that the safety of persons dictates removal of these trees as well for the traffic, for the sidewalk installation and for the traffic view.
I would just say we've seen this project several times. It's very important to the neighborhood. It just needs to happen. I think we have benefited by the trees that have been added to that corridor and the safety that it's going to provide pedestrians, and there's no weighing that, it's just too important a project. So I would move that we concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for the removal of the 3 palms at 431 Old Coast Highway pursuant to Municipal Code 15.24.090, making the finding that this is reasonable and practical development of the property and for the safety of the community. Okay.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so moved.
Chair, Clerk, and Commissioners, at 3360 Bramer Drive, the applicant is requesting to remove a large redwood tree on the Bramer Ranch Road side of the property. The Commission did review a previous redwood at this location, which was in poor condition, and approved that removal. The construction of the property is required to provide drainage from one side of the home to the other side of the home. They trenched along the side of this tree to get that drainage past the home. There's nowhere else on the property to be able to do that. The condition of the tree is declining, but the committee felt that if they provided some additional irrigation that the tree might recover. The committee felt that had they submitted an arborist report, that might have been valuable information for them to consider, but there was not one submitted. They recommend that the commission deny the removal without prejudice to allow the property owner to be able to seek out an arborist report about the condition and potential success of leaving that tree there for their future consideration. Without prejudice in this situation allows them to come back to the committee without submitting a brand new application. It would be part of this original application. So the committee recommends that the commission deny without prejudice.
Do we have any questions of Mr. Downey?
The tree doesn't look so good. I guess my question would be the tree that was approved for removal. I mean, what was the tipping point that, obviously I never saw that tree, but what was the difference between that tree and this tree, and what really is a realistic prognosis for this tree based on that previous experience?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, when trees suffer from the drought, they tend to get diseases. In the case of the redwoods, what's happening with them is they get a leaf disease called botrytis. Certainly, we feel that the trench and possibly drought may have contributed to this. The previous review intended to leave this tree in place. So the committee felt that it wouldn't be missed because this tree was still there. At this point, if this tree is also removed, they don't have that luxury of another tree to take the space of that tree. So their recommendation to deny without prejudice allows the property owner to explore whether they should support removal based on the condition of the tree or not. The condition of this tree is slightly better than the previous one, so there is a chance that through irrigation the condition can be improved.
And, do you have a question?
Do have a question. Now, this property's undergoing some major renovation. Does it have a landscape plan attached to the building plans?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, I don't know the answer to that. For a project this size, it's typical for them to be required to have a landscape plan, but it's not something that was submitted with the application, and we didn't check into it.
Because I would be curious to see if there was a planting plan that had other trees involved, you know, what we are looking at on that property.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, it's certainly possible that additional information could be obtained prior to your taking action if you so choose to postpone a decision pending further information.
So just a kind of a process question then. I mean, just fundamentally, what's the difference between denial without prejudice and postponing pending for future information?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, denying without prejudice allows them to come back with more information. If the commission so chooses to include the information about a landscape plan, that's certainly a possibility. Postponing their decision essentially kicks it back to the committee for review right away, whether or not the information is available.
Based on your experience, is it likely that a tree in its current state of health would recover from the drought and from the trenching when given time and ample irrigation?
Chair Clark and Commissioners, with my experience, this tree is not too far gone to recover, pending any findings about the trench work and the root pruning that was done. The committee, at the time the committee came out here, in fact, at the time the application was submitted, the trench had already been backfilled, so we didn't have an opportunity to see those roots. And that's why the committee felt it important for them to provide an arborist report if they chose to bring that back to the committee.
The only downside to denying without prejudice would be that for the owner, they have to go get an arborist report, and for staff, it's staff time for you to go back out again with the street tree advisory committee because it would warrant another visit. Is that correct?
Chair Clark and Commissioners, denying without prejudice allows them an opportunity to come back if they choose. They can choose to accept the tree and leave it in place and not come back. Postponing it does bring it back definitely.
Okay.
Well, I would make a motion that we deny without prejudice the removal of the Coast Redwood at 3360 Braemar Drive. Get my...
Second.
There, no, yes, and that the commission would be interested in a landscape plan if the owner brings it back.
Discussion?
Is it appropriate to also ask for an arborist report? Because really, that's what we're looking for. So I would amend and landscape plan if it exists.
Yes, arborist report and possible landscape plan.
And just to clarify, landscape plan, if they already have one, we're not going to require them to come back with one.
No.
Okay. Good. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So moved.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next item on the agenda is 2920 Hermosa Road. They are requesting to remove the queen palm in the foreground in this photograph. They're desiring, the driveway is just a little offset from the garage entrance. You can kind of see that a little bit in this photograph. The commission did rule on another tree at this location. There was another dragon tree, which is the same species as one in the later Lewina review. Because of the difficulty of getting into the front of this driveway. it was approved. The committee at that time didn't feel that a replacement tree was warranted because of the palms that already existed. The applicant also is proposing to remove the palms in the background in this photo, but they're outside the setback. They're proposing to relocate those to a different part of the yard. They have not yet approached Building and Safety to find out if they will have the ability to relocate that retaining wall in order to widen the driveway. The committee felt that because of the previous removal, the palm tree is important in its location, and they recommend that the commission deny the removal because they don't feel that this is a reasonable development of the property. It's feasible that if Building and Safety does approve relocation of the wall, that they could retain this tree in its current location and widen the driveway farther down to make better access to the garage as well. So the committee felt that they specifically said that this tree was important for the previous review decision, and that they don't feel that it is reasonable, their development, because the driveway on the right side is even wider. So their recommendation is to deny the removal.
Does anybody have questions for Mr. Downey?
I actually went there twice because
We've been there 3 times now.
that just yesterday and today, I see their point. Getting into that driveway would be into that garage, and the vehicle was parked in the garage, which is something we encourage as a city. That it seemed to me a reasonable use of their property, especially if a replacement tree is required. I understand they have some space on the other side, but then you're in your setback. You're talking about taking up setback. So I had some trouble with this one. It is interesting to hear the information about the past applications on the property, but it is a wacky little driveway, and I would not want to be backing out of that driveway. Uphill in a narrow driveway.
I mean, the hill makes a difference because there is a safety aspect associated with kind of doing a jog out the driveway up a hill onto what is actually quite a narrow street.
I have another question. Is this one that we could deny without prejudice because I also don't want to lose the tree if Building and Safety says, sorry, you can't move that retaining wall. Hearing that aspect that they don't have any plans developed or approved for it, it's a moot point to then just take out a tree to take it out.
Chair Clark, Commissioner Longstreet, certainly that's a possibility, denying without prejudice.
So just another question on the tree. Probably know the answer to this. Is that tree too big to transplant?
Chair Clark, Commissioner McGill, no, this tree is still quite within the range of very successful transplant.
So another possibility would be, okay, we understand why you don't want it there, but put it somewhere else within the setback.
That's correct.
I think one thing that the committee struggled with is that the applicants came and said that they had a driveway problem. They were going to remove the large, beautiful dragon tree on the right side of the driveway to enable access into the garage and widen their driveway. So they took this tree out, one of our street trees, and then did nothing on that side of their driveway and came back and said, wait, now we're going to take the tree off on the other side and make the driveway bigger on that side. So they do have the right to reasonable development of property, but if they take out tree under the statement that they're going to widen there, and then they move to the next side of the driveway, I'm not I'm not understanding the process of why they needed to take the first tree out. I think that was a trouble for everybody.
Chair Clark, for clarification, this was a setback dragon tree. The buttress of the tree kind of extended out over the driveway edge, and it caused the driveway to be narrowed because it kind of overlapped the cement. That was deemed that it was, the committee felt at that time that it was sad to lose the nice tree, but it was reasonable for them to be able to get in and out of their driveway.
But then the driveways, they moved that tree and it didn't make a difference. They're still not wide enough, correct?
Chair Clark, they haven't yet widened the apron. I don't know if they've gotten permission to do that.
Right.
But one of the conditions, or one of the reasons that they wanted to remove is they also wanted to widen the driveway apron. It's still constructing, so I don't know if that's something that's still down the road or not. But that was part of their proposal originally.
Okay. I do like Commissioner McGill's idea to have them come back with proof that building and safety can allow the removal of that retaining wall. It's a good idea.
I would make a motion to deny the removal without prejudice, that the applicant can bring back, if the applicant can bring back a approved building plan for that property.
And I guess I would like to also consider the possibility of transplanting that tree as opposed to removing the tree. But I won't die in a ditch over it.
I think that would be something that would need to be dealt with at the time, whether it was possible or not. I mean, as far as we know, they could sell that tree, right?
I would like to second your motion.
Okay.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, at 115 Coronado Circle, there are 3 liquid amber trees in a grouping. The applicant is concerned about the safety of the property because they're exhibiting a disease and they lean. The disease that they have is called wetwood. It's essentially a bacterial disease that causes the moisture inside the trunk to weep out through pores in the trunk. It is not something that creates structural issues in the tree. And the committee specifically commented that with this species, it's common to get this disease, and it actually can be improved through providing more water for the trees. The trees then react. This is kind of a stress reaction for the trees. They can then overcome the bacterial diseases causing the weeping and continue to grow and look more healthy. The lean of the trees, based on the architecture out there, the trees are leaning because they grew in that direction. They have not shifted their location. They were planted in a tight clump. They grew at angles so they could reach for the sun. That's what the architecture of the trees is telling us. The committee felt that the reasons supplied by the applicant could be explained and mitigated, so their recommendation is to deny the removals.
Okay. I did want to bring to everybody's attention that the written communication we have from the property owners, the letter we got dated July 23rd. Okay. Question?
Yeah, just a question. So is the characterization of one of the trees having a rotted, I assume that's
Trunk.
is that an accurate characterization that the trunk is rotted?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, there is no visual evidence that there is any structural problems with these trees, including trunk rot. There was no evidence of that.
Another question, in the letter from the owner's question whether or not the canker that her liquid ambers have could be spread to the trees across the street. Is there any validity to that concern?
Chair Clark and Commissioners, as I mentioned, this is a common disease for this tree. It can happen in any liquid amber and can spread for much greater distances than just across the street. Since it's common and it may well be in those trees already, they're just not exhibiting it because they have plenty of moisture. And other infected trees could pass on to these just as easily as these could. The committee felt that that wasn't sufficient reason to remove the trees.
Any other questions? No, go for it.
I will move that we deny the application for the removal of the 3 liquid amber trees on the basis that I'm looking for it here.
We can't make any findings.
We can't make any findings that fits the 152490.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the last tree item on the agenda today is 820 Lewina Drive. The adjacent property is developing from a single-family residence to a multifamily residence. This dragon tree was shown on plans that were supplied, but it wasn't called out. It was simply a shape on the plans. The Public Works Inspector, when it came to this tree, noted that the tree was in the way, contacted staff to come look at the situation. That's when staff was made aware of the situation. Based on the location of this tree, it exists in an area that the city is responsible for. So, the city is responsible to maintain the tree. The city was unaware this tree was in that area or that we had a need to maintain it. It was likely planted by either the current property owner at 820 Lewina Drive or a previous property owner, estimated to be about 25, 30 years old. The property under development is required to install public sidewalks. This is a route to and from the Santa Barbara Bowl that is traveled quite heavily when there's activities at the bowl. As with many other projects, when there aren't public sidewalks, the adjacent property is required to put in sidewalks for that. The committee felt that the tree was kind of important in the area, and their recommendation is to deny without prejudice, to allow Public Works an opportunity to address the issue of whether or not sidewalks can be placed in a way that could save the tree. Additionally, if you look over in this area, this is part of a fire supply line that provides fire sprinklers for the project. It is directly adjacent to this tree. Some of the roots on the tree have already been severed. All of the roots on that side of the tree have been severed for the installation of those utilities. After the meeting, Parks and Recreation staff reached out to Public Works staff to answer the question as to whether or not sidewalks can be installed and retain the tree. The Public Works response was the roadway is wide enough at this point barely for 2 lanes of traffic. If they were to go around the tree towards the public space, it would create a pinch point where only 1 vehicle could travel at that location. If it were to be installed less wide than the norm, the sidewalk would only be 1 foot wide. So their position is for any project like this, they would require sidewalks be placed. It's unfortunate that the tree wasn't noted before everything occurred, but now that their sidewalk connection does need to be made. The owner of the property that resides where this tree exists has just recently noted that their opposition to the removal. Based on the fact that Public Works has provided additional information and the fact that the owner now is opposed to the removal, staff recommends that the commission postpone a decision and kick it back to the committee for further review of that new information. If you have questions about the public right-of-way improvements, Adam Hendel is here from Public Works Engineering and can answer those questions for you.
We do have a public speaker. Do we take questions of Public Works first? Okay, does anyone have any questions? I do.
Yeah, I have a question. It says that you guys are, originally you were trying to reconsider the request after other options for ADA access have been explored. Is that the new information that you already have, or is that the information that you still need to acquire?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Martinez-Cohen, the information that I relayed about the fact that the roadway is too narrow,
yeah.
and that if it went in place and the tree was retained, the sidewalk would only be 1 foot wide. That's the information that the committee was seeking.
Got it. And then I guess maybe this is for you. The other side of the tree, I get it that if you go on the one side, it's gonna block the road. But can you make the sidewalk go on the other side of the tree toward the property owner's side? And he's the one that doesn't, or he or she doesn't want the tree removed, so they might be amenable to that, if it would work.
Commission, my name's Adam Hindle, Principal Engineer in Public Works. I think the problem with that would be that the sidewalk would have to go on the private property owner's side of the tree, which the structure is not set back very far from the property line. And so I'm not sure if that would be feasible, and certainly it would require an easement from the adjacent property owner, both property owners, and so that's something we would want to avoid, is encroaching more onto that property with the sidewalk.
I have a question. I'm a little confused at this point. Is this a setback tree, street tree? It's a street tree. So the property owner that does not want it removed, it is really a public tree, correct?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, as Mr. Downey indicated, it's a tree that was planted. The right-of-way has not been well developed along this road, so now that we're in this position, as we have been in other locations, trees that were previously considered part of someone's private property really may not be, and that's what makes it so difficult.
Okay, I mean, it's a beautiful tree, but it's a very constrained site, so.
Mr. Hindle, how wide is a ADA sidewalk? How many feet?
The minimum requirement at a pinch point such as this would be 4 feet.
Does anyone have questions? I guess from your point of view, is there any way to put an ADA sidewalk on that street and maintain the tree.
Not at this pinch point where the tree is located.
We do have a speaker to the tree. If no one has, are there any more questions for Mr. Hindle? Okay, I'd like to invite Mr. Eric Peterson to speak.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Commissioners, my name is Eric Peterson, and I am speaking on behalf of, I'm the head of the condo association that is made up of 820 Loena, which is the home directly out of the picture of that tree, and 833 East Anapamu, which is in front of that tree. Anyway, this is the first I've heard that that is a city tree. I never knew that before, so that's news to me. I'm here to argue against the removal of the tree. I agree with your staff, arborist, that the tree already may be killed because of the plumbing that's been put in there. But it is a beautiful tree. My wife and I built 820 Loena in 2005, and one of the, we kind of built the front of that structure in a way that sort of highlights that tree, believe it or not. It's a really nice tree. I do agree that it is, if you're going to put in a sidewalk there, it does create challenges. This kind of goes further to highlight the fact that the communication between this project and homeowners has been horrendous, I have to say. And this is just yet another example. And that tree having to go away because of that is just sort of would be the icing on the cake. So I understand the dilemma that you face, and it's a bummer, but I would like to explore the idea of an easement. I mean, I think there would be a way to take out some of that fence that's there and create some space that, I mean, it would have to involve people walking on 820 Loena's driveway, but I think if I talk to the owner there, she may be amenable to that. Anyway, we like the tree. We'd hate to see it go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You have a question?
So, what happens if we say, no, the tree can't go? Just going forward with the project, everything, what happens if we say no?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, Public Works would have to address potential options of that easement to see if that's a possibility, something that would have to be explored. Now, although it's not desirable that with that tree in that location, that's one option that could be explored. The other option is they need to make a decision whether or not the pinch point created by extending the sidewalk on the public side would be too much of a hurdle for the public. So there are options moving forward to look into, but none of them are favorable at this point as far as the city is concerned.
And then one last question. How is it possible to get a feel for how damaged the tree is? So, I mean, could we say, no, the tree won't go and it dies anyways? So what's the likelihood of that?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, the tree is not showing any signs of effects of anything that's been done so far. So at this point, we're confident that it's going to survive this. It's not wilting. It's not showing any signs of distress. So at this point, we feel that the tree is stable and going to continue to survive, at least for the short term.
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, I believe Principal Engineer Adam Hendel wanted to address your first question as well.
I'd just like to clarify a standard way of doing business with moving the sidewalk onto the private side is not something we would normally pursue. But if that's something that the neighbor is interested in, we can certainly work with the applicant of the project and their engineer to possibly see if that's feasible in this case, and present that to the Street Tree Advisory Committee and maybe to the adjacent property owner for their input.
I think it's really important that we recognize what the property owner stated about there being a lack of communication between the construction company and the owners. A lot of the development that our city is going to start seeing is projects like these where we're taking single family and moving them to multiple family. And if we set a precedent where a tree gets removed because it was not seen and the roots get inadvertently cut, and then we say, okay, well, then take it out. We don't want to set that precedent. And I'm feeling like we really do need to respect the property owners and at least explore the private property easement before we move on to making a final decision. Commissioner Longstreet?
Yes, but the other side of that is this is I would assume, heavily traveled on bowl nights? No? I also want to respect the ADA requirements for safe sidewalks in our community. So it is a beautiful tree. I think it enhances the newly constructed property greatly. Is there any planting that is happening around that construction? Do we know?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, they have begun installing landscape along the Lowena side of that property. I don't know the extent of that landscape plan, but there is an olive tree, at least one, that has been installed just recently.
So this is another, it's interesting that we have all these deny without prejudice applications tonight. Usually things are a lot more cut and dried for us up here. But this is another one of those where that allows some wiggle room for exploration before condemning the tree. Is that correct?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, rather than without prejudice, I think it might be prudent to postpone a decision and kick it back to the committee and allow time to explore the options that can be presented to the committee.
Then that would be my motion, that we postpone a decision on the tree at 820 Lowena Drive.
Yeah, I agree. I think I second, and I think given the fact that the property owners are willing to explore options that usually are not feasible in these cases, we should at least look into it. It's a good-looking tree. I don't think it looks like anything's wrong with it either.
And I guess I'd be very interested as part of that of seeing the all-encompassing landscaping plan for the development.
Yeah, I agree I would be very interested in someone who like to advocate for access to see what the easement plan will be. I believe there is some rock but I think access should be paramount in our city, no matter how wide you use a block is. You never know who's going to have a disability who needs access to a particular area of town.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second, and that was our discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Next is our director's report.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, it's really amazing to me that it's almost fiesta again already. But one of the wonderful things about Fiesta are the parades, of course, and certainly the Children's Fiesta Parade, which is something that the department has been engaged in since its inception. It's on Saturday morning. It doesn't cover a lot of distance, but there are a lot of people, both in the parade and on the sidewalks. And it's a great way to give children and their families an opportunity to participate in Fiesta at a time that makes sense for them. Saturday mornings are generally okay, and it's also a time for volunteers to come out and help. Certainly we have a number of recreation staff that show up to make sure it all goes smoothly, and staff that make sure it all gets planned smoothly. Having ice cream at the end is a good incentive to keep moving. So I encourage you, if you're available and interested in watching the parade, it's always a lot of fun to see what different groups put together. And it's also fun to see children grow up, because children come back multiple years and families have a number of generations that participate in the parade. And it is on Saturday, August 3rd.
At 10 a.m.? At 10 a.m.?
Correct.
Thanks.
Starts at 10. You will probably want to get to State Street a little earlier than that, though.
I have just a couple questions just that kind of fit under directors. Do we have a target date? How's it going at Cabrillo Arts? I know it's moving because construction's construction, but do you have a target date now?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, yes, October 2019. I don't have the exact day of the month. That's our goal. I will say that as part of construction, like any project, particularly a now 92-year-old building, or 93 since it really was constructed gosh, I can't even believe I'm losing my memory of it all. Some additional work that needs to be done, and so it's taken a little bit longer to address some aspects of the renovation that are critical that we would not want to ignore. I would like to say, however, that the west parking lot will be clear and ready to host the triathlon this year. So we are making sure that that can happen, and pretty much around there, and certainly by mid-September, it will be very clear that we're nearing completion. One of the tasks at hand is actually the LEED certification process. Requires the starting up of all the building systems and running them for a period of time. So we'll sort of be going, why can't we go in? Well, because there's this process that has to happen. So that's one of the factors that's adding a little bit to the time schedule.
Thank you. And the other question I had, just as we're catching up, there was discussion around the budget and the park safety issues. Will you be coming back to us with what staffs do, what the plan is for that? I'd be curious, and I'd like to stay on top of it, so.
Sure. Chair Clark and Commissioners, when the City Council approved the budget for fiscal year 2020, they did approve additional fundings to support Park Ranger. As part of that approval, they gave us the ability through the city administrator's approval process to take a portion of those funds and invest them in some of our parks where we could enhance the safe conditions for patrons, since it'll take about 6 months to recruit for that position. So there's a portion of those funds we can actually use to make park improvements. I would also add that the Ordinance Committee considered some amendments to Title 15 yesterday that the Commission considered at its meeting in May, and that we will be moving forward with taking those amendments to the City Council on August 6th. And some of those objectives related to park hours and other activities help us as a department manage our resources, and then also make sure we provide a park system that's accessible for our community members.
Thank you.
Thank you. Annual advisory committee reports? How's that going?
Chair Clark
Just
and
for
members of the
reading?
commission, essentially you receive these reports. If you have any questions about what's in them, we'd be happy to answer those questions. The opportunity is to provide the commission with kind of status of what's going on in each one of these committees, and it provides us a way to sort of document achievements and key issues that are coming forward.
I had just one comment to make. I was wondering if there was a way that as a commission, we could designate alternates for different committee assignments. If someone wasn't able to go to golf 1 month or creeks, if we had someone we could fall back on. Has that been tried before?
Chair Clark and commissioners, at times we've had more than one commissioner participate in a committee, particularly the Neighborhood Advisory Committee as an example. Certainly as part of your appointment process, it's under the purview of the commission to determine whether you'd also like to have an alternate attend or be able to attend a committee meeting if a commissioner is unable to go.
I have a couple questions. I missed the Neighborhood Advisory Council meeting, and here everything changed. So I read where it's going to Public Works, to Mike Wiltshire. How is our department then involved? Now, first I will say I'm totally supportive of the fact because it basically became a Public Works committee. But we have neighborhood outreach. So what do we see happening?
Chair Clark, Commissioner Longstreet, we are still very much involved in the Neighborhood Advisory Council. It's on some of our calendars every month, and we know through our process, whether it's for CDBG projects or whether we're developing capital projects or whether there's an activity or an event occurring in a certain neighborhood or of neighborhood interest to the committee, we will be working with Mike Wilshire and the Public Works Department to make sure our items get on their agenda. Similar to the police department and other departments, the advantage of having the committee, the council, the staff liaison come out of the Public Works Department is essentially a lot of their considerations are transportation-related issues, and a lot of the questions and desire for follow-up become transportation ones. That doesn't preclude us being involved and certainly prioritizing that we take activities and programs and services of Parks and Recreation to them.
Good. And I think it's evolving over time, and it's evolved with our district elections. There's a lot of just moving parts to me that I think we just need to be aware of and see how we fit in and what, and making sure that we're still in touch with the community. My other question was, Susan Young has now retired. Who will be staffing Youth Council? I mean, is that a position that you're going to re-employ and other staff take over? What's going on?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet. So the short-term plan is we hired Isis Castaneda to serve as an hourly employee, 20 hours a week to support the Youth Council. We did that. We hired her on before Ms. Young, Supervisor Young, retired from the department, so there'd be an actual sharing of information through that transition with a goal that as summer kind of winds down and we ramp up into the school year, she'll be in a position where she can support the Youth Council. Ms. Castaneda is also involved in several other youth organizations within the community, so there's a benefit where she can go and attend and be there as a different representative, but also bring that information back from a Parks and Recreation perspective. So we're comfortable with the solution we have now, and as we move forward with filling positions within the department, we'll look at that as a overarching support of the Youth Council program.
Thank you.
Is that 20 hours a week she'll be doing comparable to what Ms. Young was doing in terms of time?
Chair Clark and Commissioners, we've started at 20 hours. It ebbs and flows, so hourly employees can really only work 999 hours a year, so that's about 20 hours per week. So there'll be some weeks where she may only work 10 hours a week and others where she might work 30 as we get closer to the youth leadership banquets and other types of events.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments?
Just one other quick question, maybe a smaller subset of the population, but the member-at-large position for the Arts and Crafts Committee, how would that position be filled normally?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, that's filled through a recruitment process, just like any other one that we have for our advisory committees. So we advertise for it and distribute it in any way we think possible. Often we might already have a few people that are interested, but the department is responsible for that. Although I don't have a schedule for when that would happen, we will be initiating it soon. The summertime is kind of a difficult time because often people are engaged in different activities and out of their regular work schedule. I'll be happy to share that with the commission when we do start that recruitment again.
Okay. And with that, I believe, are we ready for the integrated pest management plan?
Chair Clark and Commissioners, Rich Hanna, Assistant Parks and Recreation Director. I'm here with Parks Manager Matt Parker to co-present tonight's presentation on Integrated Pest Management Plan, Pesticide Hazard and Exposure Reduction Zone Model Recommendations. I'm also joined tonight by Creeks Division Manager Cameron Benson, Airport Facilities Manager Jeff McKee, and IPM Committee Member Larry Soltzman. So if there's questions throughout the presentation or at the end, we've got staff here on hand to answer those questions for you. So tonight's presentation, just a little bit of a background. We're going to provide a background on the IPM strategy and the FAIR Zone model. We're going to review program achievements, discuss pesticide use by city departments, acknowledge public concerns regarding the use of glyphosate, and discuss and recommend changes to the FAIR Zone model and acknowledge ongoing department initiatives. So just by way of introduction, when we're referencing Integrated Pest Management, or IPM, what we're ultimately saying, it's an effective and environmentally sensitive decision-making system for pest management. As part of the IPM strategy, the following goals were included, and that's to promote use of non-hazardous and/or reduced risk alternatives that are protective of human health, the environment, while preserving facility assets, and you'll hear more about that in the presentation. It's also designed to reduce and eliminate the use of pesticide products that pose known, likely, or probable human health or environmental risks. The IPM strategy was adopted in January 2004. It involves multiple city departments. Parks and Recreation includes the Parks Division, the Creeks Division, and what was formerly the Golf Division, which is now Santa Barbara Golf Club, the Waterfront Department, the Airport Department, Public Works, and just of note, the IPM committee is administered by the Parks and Recreation Department. Also, as part of the IPM strategy, Council established an IPM advisory committee that's actually appointed by the Parks and Recreation Commission. Members with expertise in environmental research, pesticide and environmental awareness, and sustainable and landscape maintenance are appointed to this committee and play a key role in advising city staff when there's a need to look at materials or alternative practices or exemptions. The IPM committee plays a key role, as I just referenced. They meet with city staff on a quarterly basis or on an as-needed basis to review and provide informed decisions on pest management. They review, approve, or deny exemptions. They review emergency pest control decisions, so a decision that comes forward from our Public Works Department for vector control or some sort of fumigation tenting in a city facility, they'll do those review emergency pest control decisions. They prepare the annual IPM report, which you have in your packet tonight, and they investigate low-risk, least hazardous alternatives to conventional treatments. And they work with city staff to establish that list and then review that list at least on a quarterly, if not an annual basis, to add new products that are emerging for the treatment of weeds and other pests inside the city. As part of the IPM strategy, the pesticide hazard and I'm just going to use the acronym. The FAIR Zone model was adopted in February 2006. It was developed by a technical urban and agriculture ecologist consultant That person actually is a regional IPM consultant for schools and municipalities such as Los Angeles, Santa Monica, Ventura, Santa Barbara, Santa Maria, and San Francisco. The gentleman, Mr. Phil Boyce, also manages the Santa Barbara Regional IPM Coalition. He's a farm manager and a licensed pest control advisor. So he certainly provides a lot of background and experience and support and development of the Fair Zone model. And the ultimate goal here is to prioritize risk reduction activities, promote good stewardship of public lands, improve pesticide use, communication to the public, provide flexibility to managers, and identify projects to support IPM goals. So in a nutshell, the IPM zone basically models maps for city properties. It designates zones based on hazard risk and the exposure potential and defines them as green, yellow, and red zones. A green zone would be an area that's has high human exposure potential, so a park, an area around a playground. Yellow areas where there's moderate human or environmental impacts, and you'll hear more about that as we talk about environmentally sensitive areas or historic areas throughout the presentation. And then red or special circumstance areas, which are extremely low human exposure or environmental impacts. And you'll hear more about that as it's used throughout the city. Some of the program achievements since the IPM program has come forward in the Fair Zone is the city has continued to make tremendous strides towards the reduction of pesticide use. They've developed alternative practices to support IPM. We provide educational and practical IPM staff training, such as the Green Gardener Program, which is a regional program offering education, training, certification, and promotion of sustainable landscape practices. We provide internal professional training for staff who are responsible for the application of pesticides to ensure consistency and compliance with the California State Department of Pesticide Regulations, pesticide worker safety, and safe pesticide handling, all of which increase public safety. And then through the IPM committee meetings and distribution of the annual IPM report, we work to improve public communication and transparency with the use of pesticides within the community. The first project achievement that I'd like to highlight is the citywide reduction of materials. If you look at this 13-year history here, a couple things of note. Pesticides are either reported in either pounds or gallons, depending on whether they're dry or liquid. For this, we've combined units, and we're basically just talking about volume. Since adopting the IPM strategy and the Fair Zone model, the use of material citywide for green materials has increased by over 2,000%. Green materials, as an example, are Safer Soap, a product that's used as an insecticide, Sluggo, which is snail bait, or Clove Oil, which is an herbicide designed to burn weeds and so forth in parkways and medians. So you'd like to see an increase in the use of green chemicals under these models. There's also a decrease in yellow chemicals, which is 59% down, and then red chemicals, which is 89% down. At this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Parks Manager Matthew Parker.
Okay, pesticide use by department, airport. The airport encompasses 552 acres, including approximately 400 acres of the Goleta Slough Ecological Reserve. The airport has significantly reduced the use of red materials. At the same time, the airport does rely on the use of yellow materials, including glyphosate, for rodent and vegetation management in the airfield. The airfield is about 325 acres, and it is designated as a special circumstance zone to allow flexibility to management of this facility in accordance with the Federal Aviation Administration requirements. Rodent control is an important part of the airport's efforts to reduce and minimize bird strikes to aircrafts. Parks and Recreation, Parks Department. We have 1,810 acres of parkland and 60 parks in the department's inventory that the division is responsible for. In addition to the city parks, the Parks Division is responsible for the maintenance and management of landscape areas of various community buildings and facilities and over 100 city traffic islands, medians, bulb outs, and roundabouts. Plus, through contract with the waterfront, the park staff maintains the landscapes within the waterfront and harbor parking lots. 98% of total parkland is zoned green. Parks Division has eliminated the use of red materials entirely. However, the Parks Division continues to use very low amounts of yellow materials. For example, the division used only 3 gallons of glyphosate concentrate for weed management in 2018 for the division's entire scope of maintenance responsibility. Situations which may require the Parks Division to use yellow materials could be for the management of population influxes of ground squirrels, gophers that contribute to park user safety and potential bluff failures due to erosion and soil instability issues caused by the ground squirrels and gophers. Others would be the vegetation management in, on, and around historic natural resources for the purpose of not damaging those resources by way of removing stuff, plants out of cracks manually and weed whipping around the structure. And management of hazardous work environments and reducing and eradicating poisonous invasive vegetations. Examples being minimizing staff frequency of exposure in working areas of high traffic areas such as medians and bulb outs and roundabouts. Historically, low amounts of pesticides are used annually by the Creeks Division. Primarily glyphosate-based herbicide, a yellow material, is used to treat arundo and manage other invasive vegetative species for the purpose of habitat and ecological preservation and rehabilitation. Herbicide applications are known to be, herbicide applications are the only known effective method of eradicating these invasive species. It is also important to note that the application method for the treatment of arundo consists of painting a glyphosate solution directly on freshly cut stems of arundo. This direct application method allows for the glyphosate solution to rapidly translocate into the plant without the potential of the material to move off target and onto the soil. The Santa Barbara Golf Club is a 109-acre, 18-hole golf course with a driving range. And it operates on an enterprise fund, so for it to be sustainable, it must generate revenue to equal the cost of operation. Although the Santa Barbara Golf Club has decreased its overall pesticide use from the program's inception, the use of yellow and red materials by exemption are still necessary to manage and control fungus outbreaks on the golf greens. Simply put, if the playability of the golf greens becomes compromised, it quickly translates into golfer dissatisfaction, and golfers often play other courses until the putting greens have improved. Public Works and facilities and vector control. Predominantly, Public Works has eliminated the use of red materials except under special circumstances for issues like structural fumigation in the city facilities. Yellow materials are often utilized sparingly and only after exhausting the least toxic green materials. Circumstances that require Public Works to use yellow materials could be for insect and rodent control in facilities and management and control of mosquitoes to prevent West Nile virus. Again, that's after all green measures have been exhausted.
So concurrent with the reduction and elimination of many pesticides and other materials, the city also employs a variety of alternative practices. For invasive weed management, we use practices such as high temperature steam and flaming applications. Soil removal, where we'll go into a planter bed and completely remove all the soil so that we get everything. If you're familiar with nut grass, we'll go in and completely remove all the soil so that we won't have those weeds grow back in that area. We also use mulching, weed fabric in conjunction with mulch hand weeding and then weed whipping. And then for rodent management, carbon monoxide generator for borrowing rodents has been very popular. It's something that the school district tried out several years ago, and we have one of those devices, and we use that at Shoreline Park and some of our other high visibility and highly used parks in our inventory. We also do hand trapping for gophers, squirrels, rats, and mice. So just as a reminder to the Commission, dedicated funding for IPM projects and staff was reduced and eliminated during the economic recession. That included funding for 2 IPM dedicated staff known as the Green Team in 2013. In 2018, alternative practices accounted for 9,754 hours citywide, which is an equivalent of 5 full-time equivalent employees. Of those 9,754 hours, you can see the methods, hours, and FT equivalent for performing that work. A prime example of an alternative method in supporting of IPM is the recent removal of ryegrass at the Cabrillo Ballpark. Following the renovation, ryegrass sprouted due to the overseeding at the sod farm. The ryegrass creates an uneven playing surface, which is not safe and is not aesthetically pleasing when you drive by and you look at these tufts of grass on this complete landscape of Bermuda turf at that location. The department spent $7,500 in contract services to manually pull the ryegrass in May and June, and it's already returned in some locations. An alternative would have been we could have spent close to $700 and used $300 in chemical materials and about $400 in staff time. So you can see there's a commitment by the staff to actually use manual practices and alternative methods, but it does come at a cost instead of using glyphosate and other materials. So the use of glyphosate. Recent public concerns involving the use of glyphosate pet-based herbicides, and primarily what we're talking about is Roundup. I thought I would start a little bit with what is glyphosate and how does it work. It's an herbicide applied to plant leaves to kill both broadleaf plants and grasses. It's applied in numerous environments, agricultural, forestry, lawns, gardens, and for weeds in industrial areas. It's one of the most widely used herbicides in the United States. There are over 750 products containing glyphosate for sale in the United States that can be purchased over the counter at any hardware or garden store. Some of the locations and areas where we, the city, apply glyphosate are historic sites. Mr. Parker referenced maybe the Mission Ruins and other areas within inside the park inventory. Restoration areas where the Creeks Division is restoring creek beds and improving water quality. High traffic medians, bulb outs, and traffic roundabouts. If you can imagine closing down Carrillo Street to address all of the medians and parkways between the 101 exit, and as you make your way down to Chapala and beyond, that requires a lot of traffic control and staff resources and contractor resources. So those are areas both for staff safety, contractor safety, and just expeditious work. We've used glyphosate material. We also use it in urban interfaces for poisonous and toxic plant mitigation. Both staff and contractors do not like to go in and remove poison oak manually, both for safety reasons and just for an exposure potential. So we use it to deal with poison oak both along Loma Alta. So there's a pathway that runs along Loma Alta between the lower west side and up to, let's say, McKinley School. There's a huge poison oak plant there that grows up and impedes on that parkway, and we have to use glyphosate to knock that area back. And there are other areas in the city, such as Willow Glen, where we've got poison oak that grows up the side of the embankment through the fence and into the active area of the park. And the only way to treat those areas outside of manual labor, which nobody wants to do, is use a glyphosate-based product. When we do use glyphosate, we follow some strict guidelines. First of all, we do direct application, and that can involve, as Mr. Parker referenced, painting it on a fresh cut stem. It can be sponged on at the golf course, or when sprayed, it's close contact with narrow jet nozzle, so it's a direct application to that site. We value environmental conditions, so we avoid windy days. The general rule is you cannot spray if the wind is over 5 miles per hour. We obviously avoid wet weather environments to reduce unintentional runoff. In fact, the best time to actually apply glyphosate is in the morning when the sun is out to expedite drying time with the most damage to the weed material and minimize public contact. Advanced postings and avoiding areas to minimize contact with the general public are also done well in advance of any sort of application. There's also been some conversations regarding water quality impacts, and we'd like to report at this time there has been no detection of glyphosate material in drinking water. The Creeks Division has had one report or one detection in 2005 at a 1% contact, which is 500 times lower than the aquatic toxicity standards. So since 2005, we've had one detection, and it's at the absolute baseline of detection. As part of the response to public concerns involving the use of glyphosate-based herbicides or yellow material, the citywide team reviewed the city's IPM strategy and fair zone model. We evaluated opportunities to make changes while still managing city resources and infrastructure. Recommendations including modifying the existing fair zone model by designating all city parks and parking lots as green as one of the recommendations we have before you tonight. The parks that we have listed as changing to all green are listed on the right hand or the left hand side of the screen, and then the parking lots that we manage on behalf of the waterfront department, both in the waterfront and along the beach coast area, are listed on the right. We also discussed maintaining a yellow designation exception for AC Postal Rose Garden and Mission Historical Park. The product that we actually currently use there is neem oil. It is designated as a yellow material, but it's a natural product. It's used 2 times a year to address insects and fungus. And I think we could all agree that the AC Postal Rose Garden at Mission Historical Park does provide a significant benefit and a resource to the community. And we want to make sure we can address any of those potential infestations. We also, as we were going through this review, we agreed to provide the IPM Advisory Committee with an annual plan for the use of any yellow or red materials for all city facilities. So proactively providing that information and then going forward with any exemptions as proactively as possible as when situations arise.
Sorry, can you explain how that was a change from the previous practice where you asked for kind of one exemption at a time, just so people listening understand the change there?
Sure, Chair Clark and Commissioners. So probably the best example of this is the airport department come forward once a year, and they pretty much put out all of their exemptions that they're requesting for their airfield areas and runways and around the sloughs and things like that, things they know they're going to encounter on an annual basis. So those are dealt with one time in front of the IPM Advisory Committee, and those exemptions are granted under those conditions that Mr. Parker referenced earlier. This is more of a global citywide plan, mostly involving the Parks Division, where we would actually look at areas where we think we're going to need to use yellow materials, ask for exemptions with the justification, the time of year that we would be looking to spray, and the types of products we'd be doing. It takes away some of these emergency requests that come up, so it's just a more proactive way at looking at how we're going to manage our resources.
Can you explain the difference between red and yellow?
Red and yellow?
Chair Clark, Commissioner Buxton, the difference between the red material and a green material or yellow material. Yellow material is a material that is currently allowed to be sprayed in yellow zones within the fair zone, and the red materials are materials that are only used for special circumstances when other methods and other materials would not work.
Chair Clark and Commissioner Lesnar Buxton and Commissioners, we could give you a detailed accounting of everything we do and how each material is applied and its frequency. Your IPM annual report attempts to do that. What I would stress is that all city departments take it seriously, and our primary goal is to protect a resource while ensuring public safety. and staff safety too. You have the example of roadways and different ways that we have to manage our resources that are difficult to get to or present a hazardous condition if they're not maintained. The method in which we might apply a material is the minimum amount necessary to achieve the outcome. It's something that, as you can see from the data, we've reduced dramatically, and it's really to achieve a certain outcome that we can't figure out or can't do another way.
But the red products require an exemption to be used, correct? Because
Correct.
they're the most toxic, I guess we would say, the most dangerous.
And Chair Clark and Commissioners, essentially what we're saying is we have a well-established advisory committee that's very knowledgeable, and in meeting with them a couple of weeks ago and talking through where we are and what we've achieved, we have an open dialogue and sharing of information with them already, and this is another opportunity just to put it front and center, so eyes wide open. At the same time, the department's recommendation to turn all parks green really means that the IPM Advisory Committee would see anything. And if you look at if the data over the years is an indication, it's not common at all that we use materials.
All right, other recommendations include the ongoing researching of specialized equipment and pesticide alternatives, experimenting with exempt materials to support efforts in reducing pesticide use, identifying and implementing when feasible landscape enhancement projects that will provide value and benefit to the community while addressing weed populations through creative design. Further educate the public regarding the city's efforts in pesticide reduction through community outreach. That is one of the key things we hear when we get inquiries from the community. We often send them to our website where we do have information on the IPM strategy and the Fair Zone model. But making that more available to the public, and if there are areas where we do require exemptions to spray, making sure there's a connection or a nexus back to that material so people understand the reasons behind and that we're operating within inside of a model. And then, as Chair Clark mentioned earlier, when the IPM model was adopted, there was a kind of a community commitment to do more weeding and come out and do volunteer days. And we haven't seen that yet. We'd like to believe that that's going to kind of ramp up. But I think people just have to have somewhat of an acceptable level for public tolerance of weeds in parks, parkways, and street medians. This was the first year we've had rain, significant rain, in the last 7 years coming out of the drought. The weeds in Santa Barbara were an all-team effort. We were deviating resources to really target areas and enhance that for community and the visitors. We also spent over $200,000 in contract maintenance to address weeds in other areas of our parkways, medians, and our highly visible and highly used parks. So you can get a sense of there's this balance between resources and also what's an acceptable level of public tolerance.
Chair Clark, if I could also just clarify, that's money for hand weeding. So it's people that are out there doing that work. That's why it costs so much. And we could probably triple it, and there would still be issues that we needed to address.
So at a special meeting on March 20th, the IPM Advisory Committee approved the 2018 annual report. At a subsequent special meeting on July 11th, the IPM Advisory Committee approved staff recommendations to change 14 city parks parking lots to all green and to keep the one site, the AC Postal Rose Garden, as is. So the recommendation before you tonight is to approve and forward the Fair Zone recommendations and 2018 annual report to City Council, and at this time would be happy to answer any questions from the Commission.
Who would like to start with questions? Okay. Commissioner McGill?
So first of all, I commend everybody involved in this effort, not just for the report, but just for the ongoing effort. It's, the classic, what gets measured gets done. This is all measured very carefully and reported on, and 15 years of improvement shows. So thank you and congratulations on that. So, but on the recommendation to go all green in the parks, I certainly understand the potential impact on weeds as a gardener. Well, I'm curious in terms, that's an aesthetic and some safety impacts, but and what about, I'm thinking really of the fields and rodents and gophers and really safety issues. What are the concerns associated with going all green? And what measures will you put in place to kind of check that on an ongoing basis and make sure that things are still okay?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, all commissioners, it wouldn't preclude us from requesting an exemption to use a material at a future date if a park was all green, but it would be the exception, which to a large extent it already is. We have 14 where they've already been mapped yellow, so we know generally where we go. We can't, and you've brought up a very good point. We have turf that children play on that once there's rodents in there makes them safety concerns. We do use alternate methods first before we go to a method that would be considered perhaps a yellow material. Matt can speak to the type of trapping when we have used it, the fact that it's not something that's necessarily accessible to a human. So a lot of the concern around the use of materials is human health and safety. Balancing that with human health and safety on a condition. Similarly, poison oak. We have poison oak encroaching on a parkway or a pathway. The question is, how do we try to minimize it from doing that in the first place? That's our number one goal. And hopefully are able to stay on top of it. But given the amount of resources we have to manage, everybody who gardens knows what a front yard takes, but multiply that by many acres. We would try to address things to the extent possible using alternate methods, and then we would actually request a specific exemption, and we would make it more transparent when that was done.
I see a member of our IPM committee back there, and I just wanted to thank you for I think you've been at this many, many years, and your diligence and your attentiveness and your knowledge and expertise is really appreciated. I feel like you and the rest of the committee puts the public safety first and foremost. In that light, I would like to thank the Parks Department. I know a lot of there's a lot of community uprising against Roundup and I can't never say it right. Yeah, and I feel like the department has really taken those community concerns to heart, not because you want to look good, but because you want to do the right thing. I'm very pleased with where you're going with this, and I like the fact that you will be looking on an annual basis realistically at where there are going to have to be exemptions, instead of just letting a situation arise and then calling for a meeting and asking for the exemption. You're proactively planning out your strategy for the year, and I think it's going to take more time and work, but the public's really going to appreciate knowing that this might be an area where they could encounter this or see this, and they're not going to be surprised when they see someone spraying. And if they are, it's because they haven't looked to see what's going on in those areas. So thank you for that. And then one more thing is, I was wondering, we've got all these high school kids that need their volunteer hours, and they wait until the very last summer or spring, and they're not going to graduate, and their parents are pulling their hair out. Could we request the youth council to utilize their burgeoning leadership skills in recruiting members of their community to come out and get those hours and help with hand weeding? They could make a PSA. They love doing that.
Sure, Chair Clark and Commissioners, that's a great idea. We've actually been working with our Neighborhood Outreach Services coordinator for the Youth Apprentice Program that we run predominantly in the summertime, to have those individuals come down and actually take out the ryegrass that's resprouted down at Cabrillo Ballpark as an example, anything that's hand weeding, we can certainly use high school, junior high school members or adults in the community to certainly help out. And I would just ask anybody contact our Parks Division and do that. But we can be more proactive in reaching out to those groups on an annual basis for sure.
Yeah, to follow up on that, I think 15 years ago that was a great idea that we would use volunteers, and it never materialized. I wish the public would adopt their parks, their neighborhood parks, for just this kind of activity. Stella Larson, who was on the Park Foundation, used to take care of the parkway up off Carrillo Boulevard up on the Mesa, where it turned into Miggs. She was out there weeding all the time. And just because it bugged her to look at it. So encourage people that it bugs to get out there and do it. And I guess we've had this reawakening of interest with glyphosate. But when you look at the list of yellow materials and you look at the list of red materials, to me it's more about the application and the use than the particular chemical always, because they all have something that's going to happen if they're used improperly. It's the other part of this education piece that came with IPM was the appropriate use of things. I mean, 30 years ago, people just went out there and sprayed everything, you know. People didn't wear protective gear. They didn't look at all of the aspects Mr. Hanna mentioned about safe application. So the city's come a long ways. And for me, when it was explained to me how to get rid of Arundel, and I can't think of any group in our city more ecologically aware than the Creeks Division, and that they use it in a judicious application to stem a problem. There isn't another way to do it, or I do believe they would be doing it. So I am pleased with what we see 15 years later. I wish we had the money and manpower to maintain everything the way we want to see it maintained, but I think you're right. We need to accept a level of weeds, and be happy we got them this year because it meant it rained. And I was impressed that the Parks Division only used 3 gallons of glyphosate in a year. That's pretty good. And what goes on at the airport, I've got to say thank you, because they maintain a very delicate balance of safety versus the use of these chemicals. And they've done a good job. Every department in the city has gotten on board. I do remember them trying all those heat treatments for termites that didn't quite work out. So, there may be something new that comes all the time. I think our IPM committee always has their ear to the ground for new things to bring to the city, and so does staff, all of the staff, and I thank you very much for this.
And when you figure out gophers, let me know.
So please.
Yeah, I would like to make a motion to approve and forward the Fair Zone recommendations in 2018 annual report to the City Council.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. We don't have any old business, I don't believe. Okay, so new business is the annual election of chair and vice chair.
Well, I would like to nominate our existing chair, Nicole Clark, for a second term as chair, based on her stellar performance and continual growth in the job.
That's right, I love public speaking.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Volunteers? No. I would like to nominate Ms. McGill to be the vice chair.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay, and for discussion, I do feel like I need to read, Commissioner Vice Chair Perry asked me to speak for him. He was unable to be here tonight. Now I seem to not be able to find his email, but he also texted me. Let's see what he said. He said, well, he said he wanted to remain as vice chair. Please speak on his behalf. And his email, I think, said something in regards to based on his experience with the community. I need to find it. 1 second. He said, if there's a vote being taken today, I would like to be reinstalled as vice chair. My time in this community and my past involvement with the city and special events make me a very qualified ideal candidate. So that was that.
I would still stick with my nomination. I think Ms. McGill has represented the commission well before the city council, and
Yep. All in favor?
I was just going to say I agree, and I think that's a great nomination. You've just shown such attentiveness and such involvement on this board and in the community, so thank you.
And to do your research, and you're well-spoken, and you have your facts when you come to meetings, and you're always prepared, which I appreciate. So we have a motion. We'll take it to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, so moved.
and thank you both for doing it.
And with that, we can adjourn this meeting.